caregivers. I'm Shelley Brittain. I'm one of the physician providers at Evergreen Family Medicine. I'm pleased to be able to welcome all of you tonight. Tonight with me will be Cindy Kusler, who you'll meet shortly. She is one of the nurse practitioners at our group, and also Dawn Brumfield. She is a licensed clinical social worker and therapist. Both of these ladies are part of our team at Evergreen, and the three of us facilitate our monthly dementia support group that meets at the office. You'll also meet three special guests by video who share their own stories from the heart. You may recognize some of our video guests among us tonight, but I'll just be quiet and I'll let them introduce themselves later if they would like to, okay? And tonight we're going to provide a bit of background as to the development of the dementia support group that we have at Evergreen and discuss some of the highlights from that meeting that you might find helpful. Tonight's meeting is the fourth in the series of community discussions that we've called Evergreen Talks. These gatherings allow us to meet with you, our neighbors, outside of the office and to discuss a series of topics that we really hope will be of interest to each of you and help those who attend. You'll notice on the front of your packets when you came in, there is a small card for questions. If there are questions that you think of as the evening progresses, please jot those down later in the evening. We'll collect those and we'll answer a few of those at the end of the meeting. Cindy, Dawn, and myself will be available at the end of the meeting to talk with you individually a bit if you'd like as well. Just in the way of other announcements, if anybody needs a restroom, we'll go outside the door there and immediately to the left, and there are restrooms there. And if you need anything else, we've got some of our staff in the back ready to help with that. So, with regard to our dementia support group, in the fall of 2015, as an outgrowth of our patient-centered primary care home committee, we set out to determine the interest and feasibility of a dementia support group for caregivers of our clinic's dementia patients. And I've been privileged to be part of that group from its inception, and actually we have one of the folks who was part of our focus group here with us tonight as well, and we're grateful to that group and the time that they spent. Our initial meetings were set up as a focus group format, and several caregivers, most of whom were the spouses of dementia patients still receiving care in their homes, were invited to attend. These loving and hardworking caregivers were instrumental in helping us first to determine that a support group would be helpful. And additionally, they helped us to determine the topics that might be useful to other caregivers and their family members. Even in those early meetings, there were tears and smiles as these folks shared the challenges of the journey as dementia caregivers. We've completed our third year now of monthly dementia support group meetings. Early on, our groups weren't really well attended, and we asked the group at the end of the first year whether or not it was actually worthwhile to continue with the group meetings. At that point, the overwhelming response was yes, they were helpful, but we needed to help these caregivers out. They were busy. We needed to give them some reminders of the date, so we set up a call system and began to call folks every month, and now we typically will have 25 or more attendees at the groups. In the last 3 years, we've had some turnover in the group. Some of the participants have lost their spouse or loved one to complications of dementia, and unfortunately, some of the participants have had health issues of their own such that they could not attend anymore. So, who attends these sort of groups? Typically, it's the spouse or adult children of dementia patients. Some of our dementia patients actually attend the group with a family member as well. And for those who have early onset of dementia, we've had some really surprisingly good input from them about the frustrations and challenges that they each face. Our topics have been rather wide in scope. We've always started the year with a discussion of dementia. We've talked about this as a description of impaired brain function that can arise from a variety of different neurologic diseases. This loss of normal brain function progressively interferes with memory, it interferes with personality, it interferes with reasoning. We constantly revisit the progressive nature of those dementia illnesses, as those are the concerns that the caregivers face day to day. We discuss the emotional impacts of dementia. Oftentimes when that diagnosis is made, the family or the patient will complain of denial. They'll say, you know, this couldn't possibly be happening to me. Family members don't believe it could be happening. Then there's fearfulness. What's going to happen? How quickly will this occur? There's a grief process that goes with this. Losing that person that they have come to know, the person who is affected by it, losing their ability to relate to their family members and to act independently. Oftentimes there's anger with this. There are many phases with this. We discuss the changes in the relationships between adults who were once partners as they become more like parent and child. Very frequently, that change of role is pretty unpleasant for everyone involved. Equally unpleasant are the relationship changes that occur with children, because sometimes children are reluctant to accept the fact that mom or dad is having this difficulty. They may be reluctant to participate in care or not know how to participate in care when basically mom and dad's always told them what to do. They may have some problems with being unwilling or unable to see what is actually helpful for the caregiving parent. Our most interactive sessions have actually involved the behavioral changes that are associated with dementia. We've discussed a number of methods to get help from family and from friends. We've talked about how to access community resources. We've planned for safety. We've talked about some of the legal and financial aspects of this. We've talked about end-of-life planning. We've discussed guilt, isolation, and even dealing with judgments made from people who are outside of the home about care or about behaviors. We even had a session this year, for the first year, on dementia's effects on intimacy and sexuality. Now that session was one that I wasn't quite sure how it would go, and as you might imagine, there wasn't a whole lot of open discussion, but there were lots of people listening. Truthfully though, throughout all of this, as often is the case when someone gets the opportunity to lead a group, I feel like I walk away with a much greater benefit from having been there than anybody else, and I'm grateful that folks have been willing to share their stories with us. I think that perhaps the most touching session that we've had through any of the last 3 years was one that was titled Stories from the Heart. During this time, a panel of caregivers discussed their experiences as they cared for their spouses from the time of diagnosis until the time they had passed as a result of complication of their dementia illnesses. It was truly a beautiful tribute to the love that they had provided to their spouses, and I'm grateful to those folks. I'd like you to meet those 3 people now.
Exactly. Belly go over your yes. I'm Marilyn Barnhart, and I lost my husband in November. Yes. He had been, I'm 65, he was 69. He had been symptomatic for some time, and he had, oops, I'm jumping ahead here. Sorry. You know what it's it doesn't happen quickly as all of you. It happens over a very long period of time. He was a retired state police officer. I worked in the medical field in the business office part. We were married for 46 years, so lots of adventures. But the last 10-ish, he was becoming symptomatic, but his mother, her sister, and her brother had all had Alzheimer's. I was ultra sensitive for anything I could see for a lot of years. And in 2005, when she was 13 years or 12 years old, he passed. He became more, he was also 100% disabled with post-traumatic stress. He lost his bladder to Agent Orange. He had a lot of things going on besides his neurological health. So our path was a long one. At the end, it was extremely fast. It happened, he had a diagnosis of renal cancer, which was not reported in August, and he was gone by November 7th. So he just shut down mentally, stopped eating, and it wasn't a conscious effort. He thought he was eating. It was just the world he was in. So, do you want me to go all the way through?
No, we'll go ahead.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So go ahead, Gloria.
I'm Gloria Blvd, and my husband was Harry Blvd. He passed away at the end of January, so it hasn't been too long. We were school teachers. He retired at age 55. He was 2 years older than me, and I retired at age 55. When he was 58, he had his first stroke, and he had been extremely healthy. He had been a coach and an athlete, and no idea, he could find nothing of why he had a stroke. And they just tested him for everything. And finally, Dr. Schreiner, his neurologist, suggested that he might want to be tested for CADASIL, which is a very rare genetic brain disorder. And it turned out that that's what he had, and that was the beginning of a very long, drawn-out decline in his health. CADASIL affects, it causes strokes, but it also affects gait. So he began to walk slower and slower. And his first stroke caused some cognitive problems. He went on to have either 6 or 7 strokes. CADASIL, there's no cure and no treatment for it, but at least we knew what was happening. He went from being able to walk to using a cane to using a walker to a wheelchair. He never really lost his long-term memory. He could always remember people from the past. He remembered his students. It was amazing what his long-term memory was. But he might not remember that he already ate breakfast or those kinds of things. He had no sense of time to realize that it was time to go to bed or time to get up, or a length of time, like brushing your teeth is more than just taking a swipe at you. So those things are difficult, but we continued to travel as much as possible. We had great support from our family, and we were able to take some family trips there were 11 of us, 5 grandchildren, and he remembered all the grandkids up until the very end. His last stroke was about 5 months ago, and with each stroke he went into rehab and spent time in rehab, and he came back, but never to the point where he was before. And the last one, it was felt that he probably had progressed as much as he possibly could, which was not very much. And we had hospice at that time, and he was on hospice for a couple of months. He was 70 when he passed away, and we had just had our 50th wedding anniversary. So we had a long life together. And like I said, he never forgot. With his type of dementia, he remembered who I was, even though he had those times when he had a frontal stroke, one of those, and his emotions were like crying one minute and throwing and hitting and angry the dads. But I'm getting teary-eyed, so it hasn't been very long. But I'm trying to keep myself busy now. That's the thing that's important.
My name is Jack Osmer, and my wife's name is Jean. We were married for 41 years. She was diagnosed in 1999 with early onset of Alzheimer's. She had no physical issues. She never had. There was nothing wrong with her other than the disease of Alzheimer's attacking her brain. So from 99 until she passed September last year, we just dealt with all the little stages of Alzheimer's. As her brain, parts of her brain started to shut down, we had to figure out what it was doing to her and try to keep her happy and moving forward. The last year of her life, she was completely bedridden. She couldn't talk. She couldn't walk, couldn't do anything. So it was mainly for the last year, it was 100% care for her. And we just waited for her. She kept eating. She would eat if you fed her. She would do some things that you would do, but she couldn't talk to you. She couldn't tell you who she was, what she was doing. She was just a person there. And when the last 2 weeks, as I was on board with a medicine for quite a while, off and on, and we went through all the stages with her. In the last 2 weeks, we were getting into that stage of where it finally shut down to the point where she would eat. And when you don't eat, then it goes through everything else you end up eating out. And she passed in bed, just, exhausted. But like I said, physically there was nothing wrong. The things that we really had to deal with were, her mother passed from Alzheimer's, and that's why we had her tested, and the neurologist looked at it, and she showed early signs. And so we just dealt with all the issues that we came along with. Like she said, at some point she wanted to get out. She didn't want to be where she was at because she could still move around. But we had to keep an eye on her. She didn't know who I was most of the time. She didn't know who a lot of people were. Anger was there. I was very lucky because she was very small. So I could take care of her through my whole life. I was able to pick her up when she fell. I was able to move her. A lot of people that, and I see it in a lot of women, when they get into their later stages, it's tough because you can't physically move them. I was very lucky to be able to do all of that. So I kept her all the way through life. At the same time, I was living with my mom who has dementia. And so I sort of was really burdened down for the last probably 2 years of my life, where I was just strictly just taking care of both of them. I finally was able to place my mom in a place where they could keep an eye on her while I took my wife away to go life.
So with that, you've heard from 3 different folks who had 3 different experiences with dementia journey. There was much more to that talk than what we'll have time to show you tonight, but I'll tell you a little bit about one of my early recollections about dementia. I remember when I was about 10 years old, I recall my parents saying that my Aunt Lillian had hardening of the arteries. And so for a 10-year-old kid, that's just kind of a strange term to hear. My Aunt Lillian had been widowed for many years, and she lived across the road from us. And I recall my parents discussing her concern that someone was sneaking around outside of her trailer at nighttime. On more than one occasion, she called my father. She called the sheriff's office to come look for intruders. Despite the reassurance of law enforcement and my dad, this continued. So he invited her to stay at our home at nighttime, hoping that she would feel more secure. That lasted until my mother became aware that my Aunt Lillian was sleeping with her loaded pistol on the bedside. At that point, my father contacted her son, who lived in another state, said, "You need to come take Aunt Lillian home with you." So, and that's what happened. Now, I recognize that my Aunt Lillian's behaviors were certainly abnormal. Even as a child, I knew that that was not right. And I know now that she had very typical sundowning behaviors that we see with dementia. When we refer to dementia, it's not a single disease, but rather it's a characteristic of several different disease processes that affect brain function. All of these eventually result in problems with memory and learning to the extent that daily functioning is impaired. So what characteristics might you see? Memory loss is most obvious, and it may involve just forgetting the day and time, asking the same question over and over, forgetting appointments, or forgetting seemingly simple and straightforward directions. Folks may have confusion in completing tasks that were once routine. For instance, difficulty with balancing the checkbook, or using the telephone, or using a different remote for the microwave or TV. Difficulty with language can be a problem. For instance, understanding the context of conversation, particularly understanding something that might be humorous, or difficulty with answering a question. They may have a difficult time finding solutions to problems that typically were not problematic before. A mechanic may no longer be able to figure out how to fix a problem with an engine that was easy to do previously. A cook may not be able to gather the ingredients for a favorite recipe. A once avid reader may no longer be interested because they really don't understand what they're reading. Difficulty completing ordinary tasks is common. One of the most common and troubling things for folks is the difficulty with folks with memory impairment, dementia, to pick out clean clothes and actually know how to put them on, or to even how to bathe. Folks may have trouble interpreting images. For instance, a person may develop really a sense of tunnel vision and not see peripherally what's about them, and they cannot interpret their surroundings correctly. They may have a change of personality or mood. And again, one of the most troubling things to caregivers, there may be folks that were always kind and considerate and patient who all of a sudden become agitated and begin to swear. And the family members would say, "I didn't know she knew those words." What can cause these brain changes? There's a handout in your packet that describes several different kinds of dementia, and the most common of those is actually Alzheimer's disease. It's what we typically think about when we think about people with dementia, and it accounts for 60 to 80% of cases. It is caused by change of specific brain proteins, but is diagnosed by clinical characteristics as there's no specific test. And unfortunately, the benefits of the medications available are really quite limited. Vascular disease causes about 10% of dementia cases, and this would actually be best explained in the way that my parents have described my Aunt Lillian's hardening of the arteries. While I'm really not confident that Aunt Lillian had hardening of the arteries, it is a result of vascular disease, and these vascular disease problems will cause multiple strokes. Of course, not everybody that has a stroke will develop dementia, but it's not uncommon. Patients with Lewy body dementia will develop significant memory problems in much the same way that we see with folks with Alzheimer's or dementia or vascular disease, but they often have abnormal sleep behaviors. They actually have very vivid visual hallucinations, and oftentimes this accompanies Parkinson's disease. Again, this is caused by an abnormal brain protein, and the clinical diagnosis is the key here. As you see on the handout, there are many other kinds of less common dementing illnesses that can occur. There are variations that are offered in some of the treatments as far as the symptoms go. So it's really important that anyone who has memory impairment get an early evaluation to make sure that everything is being done to prepare for any changes and to also see if there are any reversible causes of memory loss. Dementia is a frustrating illness for both the patient as well as for their families and friends. And caregivers typically want to be helpful to that person as much as possible. Safety often becomes a concern, and Gloria tells us a story in her video, recollection of an incident with her husband on vacation that actually could have had a much different ending.
it's a tough one.
Do either of you guys have like a humor story that's very helpful? Because that does, either cry or laugh. Or...
I have a humor story that I don't tell very often. It's not a cruel thing, but Carrie was still able to fly and we were still doing vacations, but I couldn't, let it go very far. When we were in the pool and we wanted to go back to the room, and I said, okay, and I gave him the key, and it was a high-rise building, and he went back, and a little later, I went back to the room, and I couldn't get in. And to make a long story short, instead of going to the second floor, he went to the third floor, to the apartment that was directly above us. And thankfully, these people had actually been caregivers and they understood, but they had left their door unlocked. He went inside, he went to the bathroom, he took a shower in their shower.
I hope they learned a lesson.
He actually put on dry underwear that wasn't his. And he went to the dining room table and sat down and was eating chocolate donuts when they came. And they were able to recognize right away that, he had a problem, and they took him to the desk. And then the next person had taken him back to him. I guess he was in the room but didn't answer. But it was like, it didn't faze him that was something wrong, And I called the front desk and asked what had happened, and they explained to me that he had, been in someone else's room. And I went and knocked on their door and explained, that it had been an accident. And they completely understood because they had cared for people with dementia. They knew exactly, what the problem was. But to this day, it's kind of a funny story, but it's still.
You're the only one out of the truck.
I love that story. I mean, it just really is very endearing. My name is Cindy Kusler, and thank you, Dr. Brittain. I'm just going to touch on a number of topics that are safety issues. Some of you, I've seen you, well, a lot of you before, but a lot of you we haven't. So we're gonna have a little question, like write in questions on cards. I'll remember to remind you guys. Anyways, safety issues. That turned out just fine, but the safety issues that happen as a result of progressing dementia is very common. Challenges for safety of the person with dementia increases as the memory worsens and changes throughout the process of the disease. It's important that we know that we need to adjust what we do as dementia and the memory loss worsens. We can do a lot to help depending on the stage of the memory decline, and it's increasingly important to provide a safe environment. I cannot stress enough that it is also really important to have good communication, not just with the person with memory loss, but with family, with caregivers and care providers. Memory and the level of ability and the awareness of the person living with dementia varies significantly. So to help with the needs of that patient, it requires us to tailor our approaches to them. For example, initially a person that has a need for occasional reminders, that's early stage, but as memory declines, all kinds of things become increasingly more difficult. And as Jack mentioned, it progresses as to the late stages. Even simple tasks such as eating and toileting may be lost. by having things to help and ideas of what measures to have in place can help minimize stress and hopefully provide a sense of control both for the person with memory loss and with the people caring for them. I want to briefly mention some topics of common areas of concern. One of them, is home safety. As the disease progresses and memory declines, the person becomes progressively unaware of the dangers that exist. This is where it's important to take precautions, to adjust to and to work to provide a safe environment. One of the handouts in your packet I downloaded was the Alzheimer's Association's checklist for ideas, and I really recommend that you go through that because there's some very, very helpful tips. Some of the common safety concerns are in areas around the house and outside, including the kitchen, bathrooms, outside shops and garages. For instance, the kitchen is a very common area because we have appliances including stoves and microwaves, which of course create a fire hazard. We often hear stories in the news or from family members or people, friends, about a person that actually has to unplug things like stoves and microwaves, to also remove things like stove knobs to avoid the burners being turned on inadvertently. It is not uncommon to hear, I already said that, sorry. Unexpected challenges often occur even when we try to plan for things. For example, my father, who had dementia, while he still lived alone, he had no idea that his refrigerator stopped working. The way I found out is, I would call him every night, and I realized he was frustrated. He was complaining that he had to drink his ice cream out of the carton. So, because I had been helping him with food, I'd been buying frozen food and for him because he wasn't able to prepare things. Fortunately, because when I did get there, the food was all rotten. And so he hadn't eaten it, which was great because he would have gotten so sick. Notably, that issue I learned that happens with dementia frequently is that the loss of sense of smell. The other part of that becomes a risk is being able to smell things like smoke. So fire danger is a high risk. So if somebody inadvertently turns on something and the fire ensues, they don't smell that. So it's very important for everybody, but especially with people with memory loss, is making sure that you have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in the home. It's also important to remove flammable liquids, things like gasoline or caustic agents that may be sitting around in the garage or what have you. As dementia progresses, the person won't know that loud noise is actually the smoke detector. So those are things to be aware of. As you mentioned about your aunt, thank you, that was a perfect lead-in. Another risk factor is unsecured firearms. Same thing with my father. In my situation, because I was his caregiver, and it's important to understand, there can be risks not just to that person, but to anybody around. It's important for those weapons to be removed from access and to be secured by a very responsible family member. The next thing I want to touch base on is fall risk. Fall risk increases as we get older and our physical ability declines. But for the person with dementia, it is further complicated. With the added worsening of comprehension, increases fall risk, and so depth perception changes. Things like stairs are more difficult to see and navigate. So things like slipping on rugs, tripping on cords, tripping over cats and dogs, those become a higher risk. So that's a short one, but that's something that's important to be aware of. Is the need for personal identification. It's very important that even in early stages, when a person is, for instance, going on an errand, traveling, or simply going out for a walk, suddenly momentary confusion can strike. It can leave a person without the ability to know where they are, or even how to ask for help, or not even be able to provide names or numbers or an address for where they live or need to be going. As memory worsens, this gets much riskier over time. There have been stories in the news or by friends and family of an individual that has driven somewhere unfamiliar, a different state, ended up in a place where they had no idea where they were. Even in one's own neighborhood, individuals will not recognize usual landmarks that may have changed, even as something as simple as a new fence that can change the appearance of that usual surroundings. I use my dad as an example again. I didn't realize how bad things were getting until I started talking to his neighbors. And my father became very upset with the neighbor when he couldn't find his way home, and it was because the neighbor had put up a fence, and so it just changed that usual path. So just little things that we don't even think about. As you know, an individual that lives alone will have challenges that may go unnoticed because there isn't somebody there in the home. So the ability, compared to somebody that maybe has loved ones living with them, family, like spouses, have more challenges. Personal identification, actually, this leads to that, is really important. And so there are things like ID bracelets, medical alert bracelets that you can have your name and number and diagnosis on it. And things like wallet cards, which my father had it planted in everything from every pocket of his coats, in his car and his wallet and everything, for that reason. Today's technology, actually, there's some very good options. There's actually watches that have GPS capability. There are some medical alert systems that have GPS options, which of course usually carries a monthly charge, but it's very helpful. And in the corner there, oh, it's gone. There's a little watch. There's a watch that you can find if you go on places like Amazon. Traveling at an early stage away from home may be one of the very first indicators that there's a problem. As Gloria illustrated really well, a person living with dementia that has visited family and friends for years, going to a destination that they were familiar with, can cause confusion because it's not their daily surroundings. Traveling needs to be simplified and flexible. If traveling by airlines, it needs to be, the person with dementia will require a lot of patience, a lot of adequate time and assistance to get where they're going. In your packet, you'll also see those little purple cards, which are very helpful. It reminds that you can actually hand it to people to let the person know that the person you're traveling with has some memory issues. So the next one I'd like to touch base with is wandering. Wandering is a concern that happens and is very common as disease progresses, both day and night. In my father's case, the wandering was a big issue because as he got more confused, he lived in a very remote area. So people can get lost, and again, going back to personal identification is very important. Sometimes placing locks that allow the person to stay safe, but is accessible to other people, the caregivers. I don't know if anybody's ever been in the memory care units, but they're secure because they actually have a lock, but they have a pad that you can punch a key code in to get in and out. So there's creative ways inside the home that I've heard people talk about. Okay. Next is the medication administration. That's a big issue. As the person has increasing confusion, the likelihood of medications being administered wrong increases. It's important to be aware how this may start. People with memory impairment will often assure the loved ones that they're doing just fine. However, it's important to check to see that the medications are correct. There are options that include the seven-day little boxes that will help. In some situations, there are automatic medication dispensers. This is one that I had bought for my father. It was helpful because it can be programmed to have, whether it's once a day, twice a day, 4 times a day, but at the time of day, it will actually alarm and have a flashing light so the person can actually take that medication out of that section. It also has the ability to be locked so that those medications can't be rearranged. Amazon is where I bought most of my stuff, so that was, but there's probably medical supply stores that you can do. It is also a good time at this point, or even early on, to follow up with your provider, to communicate with the person and family about medications. Make sure to ask about what medications are for. I can't stress that enough. And to see about cleaning up and eliminating unnecessary medicines. Duplicates or medications that can actually add to confusion. Be aware of what the medicines are and indications for that, including interactions with not just the medicines, but over-the-counter medicines, as well as substances, including alcohol and even marijuana. So moving on to the next is driving. Driving and the need to stop driving is an issue that is one of the most difficult challenges that we deal with. Both the person with advancing dementia and their loved ones, this is a struggle. There will come a time when a person can no longer drive. It's not always in the person's ability or their awareness or desire to know when this should happen. It is a conversation that needs to happen with the person, with family members, with caregivers and care providers. On this thing here, you'll see there's actually a website for the Oregon DMV that you can visit if you're concerned and need to know the steps. In addition to that conversation and the license issue, it's important to remove opportunity for driving, such as removing access to keys or even having a vehicle that's disabled. At this point, it takes creativity in providing alternate ways of transportation. Family and friends, helping to drive the person or doing errands as needed are important ideas. In my father's situation, I took him to the doctor and voiced my worries about his ability to be alone and drive. He was given a memory test, which he scored horribly, so it showed that he had severe level of memory decline. The doctor told him he needed to not drive or live alone. I was not able to get him to move with me at that time, but I did remove his keys. I took them away so he could not use them. I was able to hire caregivers, and I was able to contact friends and neighbors to help shop for him and keep an eye on him. I arranged for his church members to take him to church. There were times he would get very angry, but he fortunately focused his anger on the doctor. He subsequently refused to see his doctor. So when I brought him to Roseburg, he was able to see Dr. Brittain, who was the good doctor. So she was a good guy. It was wonderful. The last thing I want to touch base on, which is very common and a high risk, is abuse risk. So, people with advancing dementia are particularly vulnerable. They're similar to small children because they don't have the ability to verbalize what is happening, and the person can be frustrating and challenging. So abuse happens in many forms. Physical harm, such as hitting, pushing, restraining, punching. It is imperative to be aware and on the lookout for risk and seek help. Caregivers need help and support, and they need to ask for help. One way that can be especially helpful in the home situation, and this is what I did, is setting up security cameras. They, again, are something that you can find online. They're actually, when you type it in, they're under nanny cameras or elder cameras. They actually call them both. It's simple and easy to set up. If the home has Wi-Fi, you can download apps, and you can easily monitor the person and ensure that they're safe. Neglect is another common issue. As a person declines, it's often a tendency to resist any assistance with hygiene, with help with medications, or even eating. It's important to be aware that the possibility that others also, that I'm not going to go into detail, is financial abuse. Confinement is something that happens. We read stories about stuff like this, Instances where a person is locked up is in a room or a bathroom, a closet, or even a shed. Willful deprivation is something where people may be denied medication, medical care, food, physical assistance, and even shelter. Self-neglect can happen when people have the inability, because of the cognitive decline and the insight. So a person is at risk because they cannot care for themselves and cause some self-harm. Overall, safety is an ongoing concern. It is impossible to be able to provide perfect solutions. And so every person and every situation is unique, and it is possible to minimize risk. There may be a time, though, when the home situation is just not feasible, and at that point, the person may need to have placement. With that, I'm going to hand over this to Dawn Brumfield. She will talk about those things. Also, just be sure if you have any questions, there's a card in there so that you can write your questions and hand them up to Ashley.
So if you just hold them up.
Or hold them up. Oh, sorry. We won't make them all file up front.
Thank you.
That's a lot of information, and we only have one more to go. So I am going to talk about dementia behaviors. Again, my name is Dawn, and I'm happy to be here tonight. Being a part of the dementia support group at Evergreen has been a lot of fun, very interesting for me, and I'm learning a lot. I'm going to be talking about behaviors that individuals with dementia can struggle with and display, and some of the ways that we can respond to those. Dementia behavior may be related to a variety of things. Illnesses, medication, the person may be hungry or thirsty. People with dementia don't handle overstimulation well, and they can be easily confused in unfamiliar surroundings. Tasks can become very complicated, or interactions can be very frustrating. It is important to identify the behavior. The following three-step approach, can you hear me okay? I'm sorry, I didn't have it close enough, I guess. The following three-step approach can help you identify common dementia-related behaviors. The first one is examine the behavior. You want to ask questions like, what was the behavior? Was it harmful? Did something trigger it? What happened immediately after? Could something be causing the person pain? Could this be related to medications or illness? And if you're just not sure, it's important to consult a physician. They can help. The second step is to explore potential solutions. Are the person's needs being met? Can adapting the surroundings comfort the person? Or how can you change your reaction or approach to addressing them? And the third one is trying different things. You have to get really creative. Did your new response help? Do you need to explore other potential solutions? And if so, what can you do differently? It's kind of thinking outside of the box. The first behavior that I'd like to talk about is anger and aggression, one of the more difficult behaviors to address. Aggressive behavior may be verbal or physical. I was a certified nurse's aide when I was in high school. They used to let teenagers do that. And when I was 15 or 16 years old, I remember working on the dementia unit, although they didn't call it back then because I'm a little more mature myself. And I needed to brush a lady's teeth. I still remember, and this has been more than 30 years ago, that when I was trying to get her plate out of her mouth, she bit me so hard I couldn't get my finger out. And I still remember her name. What's important is to determine the cause of the anger, prevent it from happening whenever you can. One way, or some of the ways to respond to anger and aggression include ruling out pain, as this causes, pain can be the cause of this type of behavior. Try to identify the immediate cause of the behavior. Think about what happened right before, which may have triggered it. Focus on feelings, not facts. And this one's really important because when somebody does something, we focus on what happens, and instead of the emotion that caused it to happen. Look for the feelings behind the words and actions. Try not to get upset. Try being positive and reassuring, speaking slowly in a soft tone. You want to limit distractions. Examine the person's surroundings and adapt them to avoid other similar situations. You might try relaxing music, massage, or exercise to help soothe the person. Shift the focus to another activity or distract them from whatever is causing them some anger or aggression. If a situation or activity causes an aggressive response, try something different. Again, you want to speak calmly, using a calm tone, and try to reassure the person. Take a break if the person is in a safe environment. And if you're able, walk away and take a moment for yourself. Put yourself in timeout. I've had to do that as a grandparent, a parent, and I'm sure that I will have that opportunity in my elder years. Ensure safety. Make sure you and the person are safe. If the person is unable to calm down, seek assistance from others. You want to always call 911 in case of an emergency, but if you do call 911, be sure to tell the responders that the person has dementia, and this causes them to be aggressive so that they're forewarned. Otherwise, it can go very badly. The next behavior I want to address is anxiety or agitation. People with dementia can become anxious or agitated for many reasons. It can help to learn what triggers this response by considering a few things. The time of day, we already talked a little bit about sundowners, what has just occurred, and evaluating potential sources of pain, hunger, a need for sleep, or sudden changes. In responding to anxiety and agitation, check again for pain, as this can often trigger anxiety or agitation. With my mother, when her pants rub against the back of her back, she's had back pain for many years, and that can cause anxiety and agitation. Sources might be they might come from being in an uncomfortable position or chair, or they may be sitting on something, an injury, reaction to a medication, or another common one is sometimes people with dementia or even the elderly, they get frequent urinary tract infections that can cause some of these behaviors. You want to listen to the frustration and find out what may be causing the anxiety and try to understand. Provide reassurance, again speaking in calming tones and with calming phrases, letting the individual know that you support them. You want to involve the person in activity. I can remember when my grandmother had dementia, and she would just sit, it was actually my great-grandmother, and she would just sit in a chair, and nobody really engaged with her. And if I had known as a child what I know now, I would have certainly been trying to get her more involved. You can engage a person in art, music, or other activities to promote their relaxation. Modify the environment if it's distracting or upsetting to the patient or individual, and decrease noise and distractions, or sometimes you even need to relocate the person if the environment is too provoking. Find outlets for energy. The person may be looking for something to do. You can take a walk or maybe go for a car ride as examples. The next one is forgetfulness and confusion. A person with dementia may not recognize familiar people, and this can be very difficult for loved ones. They may not recognize places or things. Cindy shared about her father getting lost as a good example. Forgetfulness is quite common with dementia. People forget relationships. They may call family members by other names, become confused about where their home is, and sometimes even forget the purpose of common items, like a fork, for example, maybe how to use a fork or a pair of scissors. In responding to forgetfulness and confusion, you want to remember to stay calm. Not being recognized can be painful, and it may be important for you to talk with a friend or a family member if you're having a hard time with this. Respond to forgetfulness with a brief explanation. Don't overwhelm the person with complex responses. Instead, clarify with simple explanations. You can show them photos or other reminders, and you can use photographs and other thought-provoking items to remind the person of important relationships and places. You can offer corrections as suggestions. You can use or avoid explanations that sound like scolding. You want to try responses like, I thought that that was a fork that you eat with, or I think he's your grandson, Peter. Try not to take it personally when people with dementia or Alzheimer's are experiencing forgetfulness. Your support and understanding will continue to be appreciated. Just a few more here. Repetitive actions. A person with Alzheimer's disease or dementia may do or say something over and over and over and over again, like repeating a word, a question, or an activity. The person may also pace or undo what has just been done. I think of laundry, for example. In most cases, he or she is likely looking for something to comfort, provide security, or familiarity. These actions are rarely harmful, but they can be stressful and annoying to the caregiver. In responding to repetitive actions, you want to look for a reason. Try to find out if there's a specific cause or trigger for the repetitive behavior. Focus again on the emotion rather than reacting to what the person is doing. Respond to how he or she is feeling. You can turn the action or behavior into an activity. Like if a person's rubbing their hand constantly on the table, you could give them a cloth and ask them for help with the dusting. Stay calm and be patient. Reassure the patient with a calm voice and a gentle touch. When they ask the same question over and over, provide an answer. Give the person the answer he or she is looking for, even if you have to repeat it several times. Sometimes it can help to write it down or post it in a prominent location. Engage the person again in activity. The individual may simply be bored and need a distraction. Again, taking a walk or working a puzzle might be something that can help there. Using memory aids, offer reminders like notes and photographs, clocks, or calendars. All right. New suspicions. Memory loss and confusion may cause a problem, or may cause a person with dementia to perceive things in a new and unusual way. Individuals may become suspicious of those around them, even accusing them of things like theft, infidelity, or some other improper behavior. Sometimes a person with the disease may misinterpret what he or she sees or hears. You can respond to these things by first not taking offense, try not to argue or try to convince them otherwise, offer a simple answer, and switch the focus to another activity. This last one, duplicate any lost items. Many times somebody will think they're stealing from, somebody's stealing something, or they want their keys, or those kinds of things. And getting creative and duplicating maybe a second wallet with a few dollars in it, or a few pieces of identification that isn't going to get them into trouble, those kinds of things can be really helpful. This last one, I believe, is one of the most important. Trouble with sleep. People with dementia may experience changes in their sleep schedule or have problems sleeping. And it's also important for the caregivers of people with dementia to get proper sleep. Although the exact cause is unknown, sleep changes result from the disease's impact on the brain. In responding to trouble with sleep, try and make the environment as comfortable as possible. Keeping the room at a comfortable temperature helps. Use night lights and take other steps to keep the person safe, such as installing appropriate door or window locks, as Cindy suggested. Another helpful thing is to maintain a routine schedule. As much as possible, encourage a regular routine for things like waking up, having mealtime, and going to bed. Manage a person's naps if they're having trouble sleeping at night. It can be helpful, very helpful, to limit daytime naps. Exercise, try to include some type of exercise as appropriate for the person during the day. Physical activity may promote restfulness at night. You also want to avoid stimulants, reduce or avoid alcohol, caffeine, and nicotine, which can all affect a person's ability to sleep. Discourage watching television during periods of wakefulness at night because the light stimulation is stimulating. If trouble is, you can also talk to your physician about sleep disturbances. The doctor may be able to help identify causes and possible solutions. Most experts encourage the use of non-drug measures rather than medications. There's lots of sleep hygiene practices that you can engage in. So, for this next part, because of time, I'm going to make reference to the sheet that looks like this in your packet. It gives you some great communication tips for communicating with a person with dementia. And I'll just go to the next slide. And as I am a social worker, social workers are supposed to know about resources. I'd like to end my portion of the presentation talking to you about dementia care, resources and support. When a family is faced with needing resources and support, this can be a confusing and overwhelming time. In my work at Evergreen, I often get called in to work with families who are just confused about what step to take next. The little guide book called the Senior Resource Guide, I think, here it is, this one. I think it's the best local resource we have, and almost everything that you would need to look for is in here. I'm very impressed with, I've moved around a lot, and this is one of the best guides I've ever seen. Another one in our area is called Retirement Connection. I have not seen that one, but I do know it is available in some locations. So where do you start when a family member needs placement? In our area, I believe that the ADRC, the Aging and Disability Resource Connection of Oregon, is a great place to start. The thing you want to know is the funding streams are different. So you could use the ADRC for like Medicare and private insurance, but you have to meet their criteria. It's an agency that is through County Senior Services, and it's located in our local courthouse. They have information and resources, and they conduct something called options counseling. And option counseling really assesses what the person needs and where the best resources for that person are. And their number is there on the screen. Okay, there are other agencies that can help individuals and families, but with some of these, there are finder's fees or cost. One example that's quite popular is online. It's called A Place to Belong. And you kind of do the work online, and then they'll get a hold of you after you fill out stuff. Some of our dementia care or memory care facilities in our area, we have Brookdale and Callahan Court in Roseburg. Chantel's Loving Touch Memory Care is in Sutherland. Curry Manor is in Roseburg, and Forest Glen Manor is in Canyonville. The last two slides I'm going to talk about are dementia support and caregiver support. Aging and People with Disabilities is an agency through the Department of Health Services on Harvard Avenue. If you're needing home assistance and the individual meets the income guidelines, they'll be able to help you with resources and support. This is the agency that works with Medicaid patients, OHP patients. You can also hire private caregivers, and there's lots of organizations here in our area where you can hire people to come in. Were yours private that you brought in? Okay, so Cindy did that. So one resource I really wanted to highlight is the Senior Companion Program through UCAN here. A lot of people, I didn't even know about this until I came to work for Evergreen, and I think it's a fantastic resource. It's a resource that provides trained senior volunteer companions that can help people that just need to be visited. They can drive people to medical appointments, and they do lots of different things. The referral process can be a bit tricky though. Usually folks need to go through either that APD or another agency to get referred, but it is through UCAN. And there is some information about that online. And then this was initially started in talking about, we wanted to not only address what to do with individuals with dementia, but also caregiver support. Being a caregiver is one of the hardest jobs on earth. I've done it, and my colleagues have done it. And it is, it's challenging, but it's also it can be very rewarding. Some of the great places for caregiver support include the Alzheimer's Association. It's a wonderful resource that actually offers a 24/7 helpline with resources and support. The Alzheimer's Association also has local caregiver education classes occasionally here in Roseburg, and the website is listed there. Oregon Care Partners also have great no-cost classes for caregivers, both in person and online. Douglas County Senior Services have caregiver support groups twice a week, and really interestingly enough, power tool classes for caregivers twice a year. So, in my house, I don't even change a light bulb. I'm married to a mechanic. But if he was to be the one with an illness, I wouldn't know how to use a power tool. So I just think that's fantastic, because I could learn how. And then the last one, of course, I want to mention is our Evergreen Family Medicine Dementia Support Group for patients and their families. I will now turn it over to Dr. Brittain to close our evening together.
As we finish up tonight, if anyone else has any questions on their cards, please go ahead and hold them up, and we'll get one of our staff to collect those. I have a couple of questions to answer here, and then we have one more final video clip to show to you before the end of the evening. So one of the questions is about assistance with sundowning behaviors, and that's really a difficult behavior to deal with. Oftentimes those persons can be redirected into something different. Most of the time those behaviors start about the same time every day. And if you talk with your provider, frequently you can get a medication to help, especially if folks become very agitated or aggressive during that time. Oftentimes there can be a medication to help with some of that behavior. So as far as other things go, we did mention the Oregon Care Partners. I don't know of any new medications that are on the horizon immediately for Alzheimer's treatment or dementia treatment. There are lots of things that make it to the news that show promise, but oftentimes those things are many years in development before they come. One person asked about inviting a neurologist to be present at a monthly support group, and that may be something that we can explore in the year to come. We haven't had that before. We've had lots of different other folks that have come. We've had financial advisors, we've had attorneys, we actually had a representative from the VA come one time, and we three will be sitting down over the next several weeks and working up a new agenda. What I will ask you to do tonight, if you're interested in being contacted about our dementia support group that will meet monthly next year, please, when you leave and turn in your pens there, please make sure that you sign the contact list, because we do have folks that make phone calls before each meeting, and we'll be happy to call you and remind you of the meeting. Let's see. As far as, there's a question here about hoarding behaviors. Oftentimes, that's more of an obsessive compulsive disorder type behavior. We can see that with dementia, especially when folks become more paranoid. Oftentimes, women will hide their jewelry. Men will hide their wallets. They will hide things that are of importance to them because they are certain